A German shepherd mother collapses on the riverbank, her legs trembling from the terror she barely escaped. Behind her, 3 pups cling to her shivering body, their cries rising into the cold night as shadows move in the trees. Every passing truck ignores them. Every set of headlights flickers by like a cruel reminder that hope can slip through the cracks of a careless world. But just when the darkness tightens its grip, a lone officer spots the trembling shapes on the roadside and slams the brakes with a force that changes everything. What makes a stranger step into danger when so many pretend not to see? Where are you watching from tonight? What river, what town, what memory lives in your story? Tell us below. A restless wind swept through Maple Ridge, carrying the cold breath of the river bend, pressing against the wooden houses clustered along the shore, as if warning the village that peace can tremble without breaking. Inside an abandoned grain shed near the riverbank, Grace lay curled around her 3 puppies, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. Grace was a 3-year-old German shepherd mother with sable and black fur now dulled by dust and days of wandering. Her build was strong yet softened by exhaustion, her eyes gentle but shadowed by worry. Months earlier she had been calm, confident, and sure of her place beside an elderly woman who loved her. Now every sound made her muscles tighten, as if the world had turned into something she must guard against at all costs. Riley, the eldest pup, was already nimble and alert, despite being only 8 weeks old. His narrow snout and bright amber eyes gave him an early look of a leader, though he was still clumsy when he tried to act braver than he felt. Mila, the smallest, had a soft tan coat and delicate legs that trembled whenever the wind whistled too sharply. She hid beneath Grace whenever fear rose in her chest, which happened often. Ollie, round-bellied and bold, barked at anything he did not understand. Shadows, rustling corn stalks, even his own reflection in a puddle. But beneath his comedic courage lay a heart that cared fiercely for his siblings. Grace's thoughts drifted to her former home, a wooden cabin facing the river, smelling of lavender tea and cinnamon from the hands of Evelyn Brooks. Evelyn had been a thin, silver-haired woman with soft lines on her face and eyes that seemed to smile before her lips did. She walked slowly with a slight bend in her spine, yet her voice was always warm, calling Grace her guardian angel. After Evelyn's sudden stroke, the ambulance lights flickered against the cabin walls like a silent goodbye. Grace remembered chastening the ambulance until her paws ached. She remembered waiting at the doorstep for 3 nights, long after the vehicle had vanished. Now, the shed was all they had. In Maple Ridge lived Carl Henson, a man in his mid-40s with a gaunt face and sharp cheekbones that made him look permanently irritated. His beard grew in uneven patches, giving him a rugged, unkempt appearance. His shoulders were wide from years of hauling equipment at a dog training facility long since shut down, a place known for methods harsher than the town ever admitted aloud. Carl walked with a stiff leg, a remnant of a work accident that had left him bitter toward anything weaker than him. He believed loyalty was a myth, kindness a weakness, and dogs tools rather than souls. When Carl spotted Grace and her pups days earlier, something dark tightened in his chest. He recognized the distinct scar along Grace's belly, the mark of a discontinued project he once helped oversee. If she survived long enough to be recognized, old questions could come back to haunt him. Tonight, he decided, those questions would sink with the river's tide. The sky darkened into a drifting sea of clouds as Carl approached the shed, with a coil of rope swinging from his hand. His footsteps crunched against the frost-stiffened dirt. Grace lifted her head, ears pricking at the sound. Riley stood first, body rigid. Mila pressed herself against Grace's stomach, trembling. Ollie growled but immediately stepped backward behind his siblings. As Carl stepped closer, Mila whimpered. Grace lowered her leg protectively over the fragile pup, pulling her close. She licked Mila's head with slow tenderness, a silent vow. Don't be afraid. I am here. Whatever comes, I will shield you. Carl swung open the shed door, and the weak lantern light revealed the four huddled figures. Without hesitation, he lunged, grabbing Grace by the scruff, his grip rough and unfeeling. Grace did not bite. She only let out a deep, low whine, terrified of making things worse for her babies. The pups burst into frantic barking, skittering across the dusty floor. Grace's heart pounded, but she kept her body still, hoping her quiet would keep them brave. Carl tied her legs, ignoring her trembling. He dragged her toward the river while the puppies scrambled behind, yelping in terror. The wind howled, scattering leaves along the bank. Without a single pause, Carl hurled Grace into the dark, churning water. The splash cracked through the night like a scream. Riley sprinted to the edge of the river, ready to leap after his mother. But Mila and Ollie bit down on his tail, pulling with all the strength in their tiny bodies, refusing to let him throw his life away. The three pups became a thin strand of hope, clinging to the muddy riverbank, shivering beneath the icy gusts. Grace fought the current, her head bobbing above the waves. Her lungs burned with cold. Her thoughts were not of herself, but of her pups waiting on the shore, the only pieces of Evelyn she still had. At the far end of the village road, a pickup engine hummed. Officer Liam Carter, a young police officer with dark hair, broad shoulders, and eyes shaped by past losses that made him both compassionate and guarded, slowed his vehicle. He had been patrolling Maple Ridge for 2 years, trying to forget the boat accident that once took his younger brother and left him terrified of water. Tonight, duty rather than bravery kept him on these river roads. When he heard the strangled mix of barks and splashes, he pulled over instantly. He stepped out, shining his flashlight toward the riverbank. This was the moment fate shifted. Rain drifted over Maple Ridge in a cold, delicate sheet as Liam Carter stepped out of his truck, the wind bending low grass and carrying the sharp scent of the river bend. The mist rose from the water in thin silver curls, making the night feel as if it were breathing slowly around him. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, letting its beams sweep across the muddy riverbank. The first thing the light found was movement. 3 tiny figures huddled together, trembling violently. Riley stood at the front, his paws planted in the mud, barking in desperate bursts. His bright amber eyes locked onto Liam's, as if trying to drag him into the emergency. Mila and Ollie tucked behind him, their bodies pressed so tightly together that their shivers seemed to blend into one. Mila kept her head low, ears folded flat, while Ollie puffed his chest but betrayed himself with a frightened whine. Liam's brows drew together. He had seen frightened animals before, but this was something else. The pups weren't crying from simple fear. They were pointing him toward the river. He stepped closer, and only then did he see her. Grace. Her head surfaced between waves, rising only long enough for a shallow gasp before sinking again. The current threw her helplessly toward a deeper drop in the river. Her eyes, wide, glassy, and filled with terror, were fixed not on the shore but upward, toward the place where her pups were screaming her name in their own language. That sight tightened something inside Liam's chest. It wasn't just the danger, it wasn't just the urgency. It was the way Grace fought to stay visible for her babies. A memory surged back. Cold water, a younger boy's hand slipping from his own, his lungs burning as he dove again and again in vain. The old terror rose instantly, sharp and merciless. But then Riley barked again, a sharp, commanding sound, and reality snapped back. This was not the past. Someone could still be saved. Liam dropped his jacket and flashlight in the mud. Without giving himself time to hesitate, because thinking meant fear, he dove into the river. The cold hit like a solid wall. It stole his breath, gripped his chest, and sent needles through every vein. But he forced his arms forward, fighting the current with long, powerful strokes. Grace bobbed once, twice, and on the third rise he reached her, wrapping one arm firmly around her chest. Up close he felt how cold she was. Her body went limp against him, yet she still tried to lift her head toward the direction of her pups. 2 faint barks escaped her throat, 2 soft checks to make sure her children were still alive. "Easy, I've got you," Liam murmured, though his teeth were chattering so hard the words nearly broke. The swim back felt 10 times longer than the approach. The current clawed at his legs, pulling him sideways, but he kept kicking, fueled by something deeper than strength, by the fierce unity he had seen between a mother and her pups. When he finally reached the bank, the mud sucked at his boots as he pulled Grace from the water. The instant her body touched the ground, the pups exploded toward her. Riley pressed his head into her neck, whining softly. Mila climbed onto her belly, giving her warmth her own tiny body barely had. Ollie leaned against her side, puffing up like a shield against the cold wind. Grace, though shivering uncontrollably, raised her muzzle to sniff each of them, confirming they were safe before allowing her head to rest on the earth. Liam knelt beside her, breathing hard. The raw, instinctive devotion he witnessed struck him with unexpected force. It felt human, more human than many things he had seen people do for one another. He touched Grace's soaked fur gently. "You're tougher than anyone I've met," he whispered. Rain began falling in light, steady drops, giving everything a fragile glow under the beam of the fallen flashlight. Liam realized the cold could kill Grace if he didn't act immediately. He slid his arms under her again, grunting with effort. Riley trotted close. Mila clung to Liam's pant leg with trembling paws, and Ollie waddled after them with stubborn loyalty. Liam opened the passenger door with his elbow. He placed Grace on the seat and then lifted each pup in after her. Riley curled into her neck, Mila tucked under her foreleg, and Ollie sprawled across her chest as though guarding her heart. Liam covered them with his jacket, turned the heater to its highest setting, and sat for a moment watching the 4 shaken creatures begin to breathe in unison. Something shifted in him, a quiet, unexpected certainty. Whatever cruelty had pushed these dogs into the river, whatever darkness had driven someone to throw away a family, it ended here, with him. He put the truck in gear and drove through the veil of mist toward the Maple Ridge Rescue Shelter, unaware that saving these dogs would soon unravel truths buried far deeper than the river's dark currents. The rain eased into a thin mist by the time Liam pulled into the Maple Ridge Rescue Shelter. The warm lights inside glowed like a promise against the cold night he had dragged Grace and her pups from. Dr. Nora Kim hurried out as soon as she saw him carry the limp mother dog in his arms. Nora, a woman in her early 40s, possessed a quiet steadiness that came from years of treating abandoned animals. She had a round, soft face, raven black hair pulled into a low bun, and small rectangular glasses that always slid down her nose whenever she concentrated. Though gentle with animals, she was famously blunt with humans, a trait shaped by losing her own dog in a neglect case years ago. That trauma had turned her into a relentless guardian for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. Nora laid Grace on the exam table, her hands swift but careful. Liam stood nearby, soaked, shivering, but refusing to leave. The 3 pups huddled together in a corner blanket, their eyes never leaving their mother. "This scar isn't from an accident," Nora murmured, tracing the faint puckered line across Grace's abdomen. "It was surgical, recent, maybe within the last year." Liam frowned. "Like a spay?" Nora shook her head. "No, this incision is too long, too deliberate. Someone opened her up to test something, not to help her." Liam's jaw tightened. "And her chip?" "I checked. They wiped every record clean. Dogs don't just walk around with erased identities unless someone wants them gone unseen." The words settled over Liam like thick fog, heavy and cold. He looked at Grace, her ribs still rising and falling with fragile effort, and something inside him coiled with a quiet, controlled fury. He had seen cruelty before, but this was systematic. "Nora," he said quietly, "who worked around here that had access to dogs like her?" Nora hesitated. "The only place that matches that scar pattern is the old Canine Response and Hazard Lab by the river's bend, shut down 3 years ago. Complaints, rumors, mistreated animals. Nobody talks about it now. She pushed her glasses up. Carl Henson worked there, the man who's been skulking around recently. Liam's breath stilled. The river attack suddenly made terrifying sense. He turned to the pups and knelt. Riley nudged his hand insistently. Mila let out a soft mewl, and Ollie rested his chin on Liam's boot, as if begging him not to leave their mother again. "I'll be back," Liam whispered, giving each pup a gentle rub. "I have to know what they did to her." Minutes later, he was driving through the quiet edge of Maple Ridge. The road winding along the river took him into the woods, where an abandoned sign, faded and cracked, marked the entrance to the training compound. The buildings stood like skeletons in the dark, walls bowed, windows shattered, roofs sinking under years of rot. But something inside felt awake in a dangerous way, as if the shadows themselves were watching. Liam pushed open the door of the main cabin. The hinges groaned, echoing through the emptiness. His flashlight cut through dust and broken crates littering the floor. He stepped carefully, scanning every corner until he found a rusted metal locker half buried under debris. Inside lay a stack of water-damaged notebooks tied together with fraying string. He lifted the first book and wiped the cover. Field notes, data olfactory response trials. His stomach sank. He opened it and flipped slowly through pages stained by mud and time. Diagrams of dog anatomy, lists of chemicals, sniff response charts, behavioral notes. Words like failure, insufficient bond, replace subject appeared more than once. He reached a page where a crude drawing of a German shepherd was sketched, a small mark across its abdomen, the scar, Grace's scar. A low snap of a twig outside jolted him. Liam froze. Then a voice slithered from the darkness behind him. "I knew someone would come poking around eventually." Liam spun as Carl stepped into the cabin doorway. The yellow beam of Liam's flashlight revealed Carl's narrow, angular face, his stubble patchy and unkempt, eyes sunken but burning with a mean, brittle determination. His clothes were soaked, streaked with river mud, and the rope he used earlier hung from his belt like a trophy. Carl's past as a trainer had hardened him, but it was his dismissal after the lab shutdown that warped him, leaving him bitter, convinced the world owed him something. "You should have minded your business, officer," Carl said. "That dog and her pups shouldn't exist. They're reminders of a mistake." Liam's body tensed, but before he could move, Carl lunged. The two men crashed into a cabinet, scattering papers. Liam blocked a punch, shoved Carl backward, and sprinted out the back door, just as Carl grabbed a rusted shovel and followed, cursing. The rain turned the riverside path into a slick, treacherous trail. Liam's boots slipped. Carl's shouts grew closer. Just when Liam reached a dense patch of brush, a sudden bark cut the air. Riley. The pup appeared from the shadows, tail stiff, eyes sharp, having slipped from the shelter through an open gate to follow Liam's scent. He barked again, running in a zigzag toward a thicket Liam hadn't noticed. A narrow gap under fallen branches, large enough for a man to crawl through, opened toward the direction of the village lights. Carl burst from the trees, swinging the shovel blindly. Liam dove into the hidden passage, Riley flattening his small body to squeeze beside him. Carl swung again, but the shovel hit a trunk, reverberating with a metallic crack. Mud slid under him, and he toppled forward. That hesitation gave Liam just enough time to scramble through the narrow exit. He emerged near the far edge of Maple Ridge, the village lamps glowing weakly through the mist. Riley barked triumphantly and nudged, his leg as if urging him to hurry. Liam scooped the pup into his arms and ran. Behind them, Carl's furious shouts dissolved into the wind. Morning settled over Maple Ridge with a pale, misty light, soft as breath against the windows of the rescue shelter. Liam stood near the entrance, arms crossed. Riley curled at his feet, while inside, Grace rested on a thick blanket surrounded by Mila and Ollie. The pups finally slept without trembling, unaware that danger lingered quietly beyond the warmth of the shelter walls. Carl Henson returned just after sunrise. His boots slammed onto the gravel lot, and his shadow stretched long and distorted behind him. His face, sharp, gaunt, with the kind of stubble that made him look more desperate than rugged, twisted with irritation. His eyes, narrow and restless, carried the edge of a man whose life had been built on control and who now found it slipping from Sarah's fingers. The collapse of the old lab, his dismissal, his failed attempt to erase Grace, all of it fueled a bitterness that burned through every step he took. Liam stepped forward. "You're not coming inside." Carl smirked. "You think a small-town shelter can keep something that belongs to a corporate research contract? That dog and her brats are research assets. They're coming with me. End of story." But this morning, Carl was not speaking to an empty lot. Doors throughout Maple Ridge swung open. One by one, villagers approached the shelter. First came Harold Dempsey, the bakery owner, a wide-bellied man in his late 50s with flour always caught in the creases of his beard. Though usually mild and soft-hearted, today he carried a sign that read, "Protect every paw." His eyes were stern, a father's anger stirred awake. Then Marta Ruiz, the tall, wiry school librarian with silver-streaked hair and a long camel coat, stood beside him. She held her phone up, live stream already running. Her following, mostly former students and local parents, began flooding into the feed. Soon the entire village spilled into the lot. Farmers with sun-weathered faces, teenagers in muddy boots, the mechanic in his oil-stained jacket, a nurse still in scrubs. 50, 60, more. The people of Maple Ridge formed a wall. Carl stopped mid-step. "Move." "No," Harold said, voice steady as an oak trunk. "Not today." Phones rose, cameras turned on, live stream hearts and comments flooded in. The weight of witnesses closed around Carl like a tightening net. Liam didn't raise his voice. "You hurt her. You hurt all of them. You think we'll let you take her again?" Before Carl could spit out a reply, a soft murmur cut through the building crowd. Heads turned as a small figure emerged from a cab that had just pulled in. Evelyn Brooks, Grace's former owner. She leaned on a wooden cane, her movements slow but purposeful. Evelyn was nearly 80, with gentle creases etched across her pale skin and thin white hair tied in a fragile bun. Her frail frame did little to hide the fire in her expression. Though illness had dimmed her strength, it had sharpened something else, her resolve. The villagers parted for her like water around a stone. Evelyn approached Carl, her voice quivering yet unwavering. "You don't get to touch her again." She turned to the crowd. "This man allowed animals to be starved, cut open, frightened until they broke." Carl's jaw twitched. "You have no proof." "I have memory," Evelyn whispered, "and sometimes memory is enough." Liam stepped beside her. Riley, sensing the tension, moved between Evelyn and Carl, his small body stiff, tail straight, ready to protect. Evelyn raised her face toward the gathering. "Grace came to me hiding scars, physical and deeper ones. I knew something was wrong at that lab. I saw dogs dragged by ropes, punished for failing tests they didn't understand. Grace was terrified of metal tables, terrified of the dark. I couldn't watch them destroy her spirit, so I took her home. I saved her the only way I could." The villagers murmured, soft anger building. Carl scoffed, but now sweat beaded at his temple. "The company will take her back. They own her." "No one owns a life," Evelyn said. A hush spread as the town council, alerted by the live stream, arrived for an emergency hearing. They gathered on the shelter's porch. Councillor Ben Hart, a tall man with sandy hair and a neatly trimmed beard, known for his calm demeanor and fairness. Marcy Lyle, a petite woman with thick glasses and a sharp mind. And old Judge Remington, thin and cane-backed, but with a voice still commanding from decades on the bench. Ben spoke first. "We have the authority to hold a community hearing. Carl Henson, you're called before us." Carl's glare could have cut glass, but he stepped forward. In the brief but fierce field hearing, live streamed before half the town, testimonies poured in. Nora's medical report, Liam's statement about the attack, Evelyn's quiet confession of rescuing Grace from the lab, and even villagers sharing stories of Carl's rough handling of strays from years past. It didn't take long for consensus. Judge Remington tapped his cane once. "Our ruling is simple. Grace and her pups are not property. They are living beings, members of this community, and Maple Ridge will protect them." Carl's face went red. "This isn't legal," Ben answered calmly. "It is within our authority. And you, Mr. Henson, are now under investigation. The sheriff will escort you off this property." As officers stepped forward, Carl backed away, his bravado crumbling. The villagers didn't cheer. They simply stood tall, unified in quiet strength. And inside the shelter, Grace lifted her head weakly, as if sensing the shift in the world outside. A shift that meant safety, belonging, and a promise kept. Spring arrived softly in Maple Ridge, not with trumpets or fanfare, but with the gentle push of warm air rolling up from the river bend. The grass along the banks grew in long emerald ribbons, swaying like they remembered the icy nights that once tried to swallow the village whole. Liam Carter walked that river path each morning with Grace and her pups, now healthy, lively, and stitched into the very heartbeat of the community. Grace trotted beside him, her fur fuller, glossier, a rich sable coat reflecting the golden tint of early sunlight. She carried herself with a quiet nobility, an earned dignity shaped not by triumph alone, but by survival. Her scar was still visible if you looked for it, a pale line on her abdomen, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was the calm assurance in her eyes, the way she placed her body between danger and her loved ones without hesitation. She had become the village's silent guardian. Riley had grown taller, his legs longer, his stance more confident. The once frantic puppy now moved with the alert focus of a dog with purpose. Liam trained him gently, knowing Riley's intelligence wasn't forged through commands, but through instinct and loyalty. The boyish little shepherd soon became Maple Ridge's search companion, helping find children who wandered too far into the woods, barking sharp and clear until adults followed him. His amber eyes always glimmered with determination, and villagers swore he understood fear before people spoke a word. Mila, the smallest of the siblings, found her calling in companionship. She often wandered toward the Maple Ridge retirement home, curling beside lonely laps like she had been born to mend hearts. The residents adored her. She would press her warm muzzle against wrinkled hands, listening without judgment. Her fur was a softer shade of tan than her siblings, and her dark, doe-like eyes seemed to hold a quiet knowing. She healed the kind of wounds that medicine couldn't touch. Ollie, meanwhile, became the spirit of the village's children. Plump, merry, perpetually stumbling into his own paws, he was a walking cloud of laughter. He seemed built for joy. His tail wagged with such intensity, it became a local joke. Ollie could power the whole village if we hooked him to a windmill. Kids squealed whenever he barreled toward them, his floppy ears bouncing wildly as he crashed gently into their legs before rolling onto his back for endless belly rubs. Under Liam's roof, all four shepherds found a home where love was not just present, but overflowing. Maple Ridge blossomed too. The fear that once hung over the village had faded, replaced by pride and a kind of shared responsibility. Grace's story had reminded them of the quiet power inside every small act of kindness, the way a village could protect its own simply by choosing to care. The spring festival arrived with an explosion of color, banners strung between lampposts, stalls overflowing with pastries, hand-carved trinkets, knitted scarves, and jars of honey. Music drifted across the river meadow as villagers gathered on blankets, children weaving between booths, with Ollie in tow. At the center of the festival grounds, a small wooden stage stood beneath an arch of blossoms. Liam was gently nudged up onto it by Harold Dempsey, the baker, whose apron remained dusted with flour even during celebrations. Behind Liam sat Grace, her head high, her pups sprawled around her like the petals of a blooming flower. The crowd quieted as Liam looked over them, friends, neighbors, strangers who had become family, not through blood but through shared courage. He spoke softly at first, his voice a warm rumble carried by the spring breeze. Grace didn't just survive what was done to her, he said, resting his hand on her neck. She taught us something. The villagers leaned in. She taught us that hope doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes with 4 wet paws, a trembling heartbeat pressed into your chest, or a gentle nudge when you think you're alone. He swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. She taught us that you don't give up on the ones you love. Even when the night is cold, the water is deep, and the world seems dark. Around him the meadow shimmered in the fading light. Mila curled beside the foot of the stage. Riley sat at attention, listening as if every word mattered. Ollie rolled halfway down the hill, chasing a butterfly, sending a wave of giggles through the children nearby. And Grace, graceful, steady, radiant, lowered her head and nudged Liam's hand as if to say, "I'm here." The wind from the river bend warmed, tugging at banners, brushing against fur and skin alike. The sun sank behind the trees, turning the sky gold and rose. Grace lay down on the soft grass, her pups nestled into her side, a picture of peace after storms long past. And as the villagers watched the shepherd family breathe in quiet unison, Maple Ridge felt something it hadn't felt in years. A beginning, a gentle promise that even after darkness, even after river water and fear and cruelty, a new life could rise again. In the quiet glow of Maple Ridge's spring sunset, when the rivers softened and the fields shimmered with gentle greens and golds, one truth rose above everything that had happened. Sometimes God speaks not in thunder, nor in miracles carved across the sky, but through small lives covered in fur, through devotion that knows no fear, and through love that refuses to drown, even in the darkest waters. Grace and her pups carried the colors of faith with them. Riley, bold amber eyes shining like the flame of courage. Mila, soft tan fur like the warmth of compassion. Ollie, bright and bumbling, reflecting the joy God sprinkles into life so we never forget to laugh. And Grace herself, her coat catching the golden light like a reminder that every scar, no matter how deep, can become a place where God's light enters. Their journey tells us that no matter how cold the river becomes, no matter how harsh the night feels, a dawn painted in God's colors still waits on the other side. And in our everyday lives, when loneliness creeps in, when fear whispers, when burdens feel too heavy, sometimes hope arrives on 4 paws, or in a small kindness from a stranger, or simply from the quiet certainty that God watches over those who choose love. So if this story touched you, let it be more than a tale. Let it be a reminder that we are never abandoned, that courage can be gentle, that faith can look like a trembling pup protecting his mother, and that God sends light into our world in forms we least expect. If this message warmed your heart, please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to our channel to support more stories like this, and may God's blessing, soft as spring light and strong as the river bend's current, rest gently on you and your family.